to be here and to have the opportunity to be working with you as we go through Wednesday night of this week. I've been looking forward to the opportunity and being able to meet the good brethren that work here. I've had the pleasure of being able to know the Slayball family for many years and dearly love them and their sweet kids. Have had the pleasure of getting to know Stephen over the last few years since I've been in Blue Springs, but the great majority of you here, I've not had that pleasure, and so this is going to be a good week for me. I've mentioned that in the Bible class period this morning. Someone said something about trying to choose songs for the sermon titles that I announced, and you might notice that I guess most of my sermon titles are just a scripture, and that's because I'm not very creative. So I find that it's better that I just use a scripture as the title of the lesson, but sometimes you may not know how's he going to develop that lesson, and in case maybe you are visiting and you're thinking about trying to come back this week, I want to just mention this before we begin. Tomorrow night, this evening, it will be a continuation of this morning's study from Hebrews chapter 12, and you'll see what that's about in just a moment. But Monday evening, I think the title is If They Will Not Hear Moses and the Prophets. The study Monday evening is really regarding the sufficiency of God's Word and how we need to understand that and how that needs to apply in our lives. So we're going to be talking about the power of God's Word, the sufficiency of God's Word. Hopefully you'll be able to come back for that. We've certainly seen among many brethren throughout the years digression and even apostasy because there has been a lack of appreciation for the sufficiency of God's Word. On Tuesday evening, we're going to be looking from Romans 10 and verse 13 that whoever calls on the name of the Lord should be saved. And what we will be discussing and studying that evening is what does that mean? And if you've called on the name of the Lord, if you've been saved, then we sure hope that you'll come back Tuesday evening to investigate with us, to make sure that we've done what the Lord would have us to do in order to call upon His name. Certainly no one can be saved if they've not done that. And yet there are varied ideas and theories and concepts about what it means to call on the name of the Lord. That'd be a great evening for you to bring your friends from the community that are religious, that are members of various denominations, who believe that they've been saved, for a good study of what that means. And then Wednesday night, I hope is self-explanatory, live like you were dying. We're going to be talking about what that means in the Christian's life, to live each day as if it were their last. So we hope that you'll be able to be with us every night. But if you're not going to be able to, and you're trying to decide what these studies are going to be about, hopefully that helped you just a little bit. I want to begin the study this morning, though, by asking a question. I'll do that again on Tuesday night. But this morning, I simply want to ask the question, what do you want more than anything else? If I had the power to grant a wish, and you could ask for anything, what would you want more than anything else? And you need to take a little bit of time to think about that because you only get one. And I don't want you to answer out loud. I don't need you to raise your hand. I just want you to think in your mind, maybe make a note. What would that be? And I expect that given enough time, if we were to think about what we want more than anything else in life, most of us would eventually realize, well, I want to go to heaven more than anything else in life. And I hope that that would be your answer. But you know, sometimes we answer questions by what we think is the right answer, or even what we think other people want to hear. We're not always honest with ourselves and with others when we answer questions like that. The reason I say that is because this is maybe a loaded question. We're going to be exploring this. You see, if you really want heaven more than anything else, you'll do whatever it takes to get there. What do you want more than anything else? You know, a young man who wants a young woman's hand in marriage, he makes that his primary focus, and he'll go to any length. He'll jump over the moon to win her heart. An athlete who wants to win a state championship or to play on a collegiate or Olympic level is going to do whatever it takes to get there. A musician who wants to play on the big stage, a scholar who seeks to be valedictorian. All of these are goals that we set. And how bad do you want that? Are you willing to do what it takes to get there? Now, all of these that I've just mentioned are temporal goals, and they shouldn't be what we want more than anything else. For many people, they are. But what we need to be looking at is that eternal home in heaven. And yet, while we know that that should be what we want more than anything else, sometimes the proof is in the pudding. Are we really living a life that shows that that's what we want more than anything else? And as I said, sometimes we give the right answer, but it's not really the answer of our heart. The illustration of that, when I went off to college, I was asked by so many people, Brett, what are you going to major in? What do you want to be? What are you going to study? And I remember thinking to myself, I don't really want to study. I'm going to be with my friends, intramural sports and fun. And I kept thinking to myself, I don't know, I'm not really that into school, but, you go to college. And I kept trying to think, what's going to impress people? What's the answer that I'm going to get the most approval from? And what can I do that's going to make me some pretty good money? Well, my dad was a mechanical engineer by trade, and my older brother that I really looked up to was going to school, majoring in mechanical engineering. That seemed to impress a lot of people. So I said, I'm going to major in engineering. Well, my dad, knowing his son, as parents know their kids, knew that math was at the bottom of the list of what my forte was. And he said, Brett, are you sure you want to be an engineer? And I said, oh, yeah, absolutely, Dad. And he said, math's not really your long suit, son. And I said, well, I know, I understand, but I'm gonna work really hard, Dad. You're gonna see. And okay. So I met with a counselor, and she got me enrolled in all the classes that I needed to take to begin my path to be an engineer. And I want to tell you, within 2 weeks of those classes in the algebra and trig and chemistry, I knew in 2 weeks that I didn't want to be an engineer ever in my life. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to know an engineer. Who would want to study that stuff? And so I quickly changed things and began another path. And the point here is that sometimes we know what we think is the right answer or what people want to hear, and that's how we fill in the blank, but that's not really what we want from our heart, and that's the test. This is real, brethren. The reason that we're here to praise God, to worship Him, to observe this memorial, it has to do with who we are at our very core. And if it's not, then it's all fake. And I understand, and I've been there, that for some people, they're going through the motion without the emotion. They're faking it until they can make it. And this is just what you feel like you have to do. And I will tell you, having been there, don't ever sever yourself from hearing the gospel and the power of God's word that is the only thing that's going to bring you back to Him. Don't do that. But at the same time, I'll tell you, during that lapse and during that time, you're not in a saved condition and you're not going to heaven. And here's the thing, there are many times I think that in our lives, we might be doing really everything pretty right. We're not doing anything really wrong. But we're not really pursuing that goal of heaven above all other things. Sometimes we know the right answer, but we're not really willing to do whatever it takes to get there. You say, well, Brett, I don't think that's me. I am. I want to do whatever it takes to get there. Well, if that's the case, then if I could show you a way to accomplish that eternal home with more ease and surety, surely you would do it. If somebody could have shown me how to get my degree in 1 year, I would have said, I'm in. That's my thing there. And so if I could show you how to accomplish that eternal home with more ease and surety, then maybe what you're doing, surely you'd be willing to do it, because this is really not just with more ease and surety. I believe that this is absolutely crucial in what it takes. Look in Hebrews chapter 12. I want to show you what is an essential key to really achieving that goal of heaven. Hebrews chapter 12. And I want to read there in Hebrews chapter 12, and I want you to notice with me in verse 1. The inspired writer says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. There it is. You say, well, Brett, I've read that verse many times, and I don't really see any profound key in that. Well, here's where I think we find it. He says, let us lay aside every weight and run with endurance the race that is set before us. What does he mean here when he says lay aside every weight? What he's conveying to us, he's using a metaphor of a race and of things that essentially hinder us. When he uses the word weight, one translation uses the word encumbrance. And he's talking about things that weigh us down and that would hinder us in this metaphorical, this spiritual race that we're running. Remember in 1 Corinthians 9, in our Bible class, we saw where Paul talked about all run in a race, but only one receives the prize. And he said, run that you may obtain it. This isn't the first time he's used the idea of a race as a metaphor of getting to heaven. And he says, you need to run like you really are wanting to get there. You're not shadow boxing here. This is real. This is a real thing. You're really doing what is necessary in order to get to heaven, and what's necessary is to lay aside every weight. You know, when he talks about laying aside every weight, I believe he's talking about things that are not necessarily sinful, but that they're not helpful. Because he says, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And for whatever it's worth, I think that sin he mentions there is the sin of unbelief. It's consistent throughout the book of Hebrews. But I think he's talking about something else when he says lay aside every weight. I believe he's talking about things that are not wrong inherently, but they're things that hinder us in our race. Remember, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6, we saw the same thing in 1 Corinthians 10 this morning. I think it was verse 23. But in 1 Corinthians 6, he says in verse 12, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Notice that. Some things that are lawful are actually not helpful to us. If we were to diagram this, I think that we could consider a realm of things that are lawful for us. They are authorized by God for us, and it's not wrong if we do them. It's not wrong if we don't do them. But what Paul is revealing to us, and this is such an important key of spiritual maturity, is to understand that just because something is lawful doesn't mean that we need to do it. There are many things within what is lawful that's not going to help us get to heaven. Within that realm, there are some things that are expedient. They expedite running this race with endurance, but not everything does that. And so when he talks about not all things being helpful, notice he says that within that realm of things that are lawful, I will not be brought under the power of any. This, friends, is the key in understanding what's wrong with addiction. There are people that are addicted to things that are not inherently sinful. Substance, practice, habit. Paul said, no. It may be right in and of itself, but when I become brought under the power of that, we talked this morning about our liberties becoming our Lord, and that's what happens in our lives as Christians sometimes. One of the reasons that we feel exhausted spiritually and weighed down is because we're carrying things, we're insisting on holding on to things that are not necessary for us in order to get to heaven. You know, when we think about that idea of a weight, he's using the metaphor of a race, and we know that people that run, and I'm sure there's runners in this congregation, they spend a lot of money on buying the lightest shoes, the lightest weight clothing. They want to do everything they can to get rid of any encumbrance. I want to ask you, if you were, let's say they were having a marathon here in Lewisville or in the area, and while I'm in town, I mentioned to you, while I'm in town, I'm going to run in that marathon, which, don't worry, that never happened. But you might say, well, the visiting preacher's going to run 26 miles. I got to go down there and see this. So you come down that morning to the starting line, and you're looking, where's that guy at? And then here you see me with this big 5-gallon orange water jug. And I'm stretching out and running in place, and I've got this thing full of ice water up on my shoulder. And you make your way down there to me, and you say, hey, Brett, have you ever ran one of these before? No, I haven't. My first one. You say, well, I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of people run this race not even to win it, but just to see if they can finish. It's an exhausting, grueling race. And if you carry that water jug with you, you're probably not going to finish. What would you think if I were to respond to that by saying, you know what? I looked all through the rule book, and it's not against the rules for me to carry water with me. Any amount is legal. And I like to drink water when I run. You'd say, all right. I would have just manifested to you that I value my water more than I value finishing. Isn't that right? And that doesn't really matter when it comes to a marathon. But when it comes to the temporal things of this life that are not inherently wrong in and of themselves, but when they're having an impact on me, when they're affecting me spiritually, and I'm wanting to argue from the standpoint of what is sinful and what is not sinful, I've lost my way. I'm not understanding. I'm not seeing spiritually or spiritually minded the truth that there are some things of a temporal nature that are not necessary to go to heaven, and while they're not wrong, they can actually become an encumbrance in my life. I know that this may seem very simple to you, but this was a principle that as a young man, when I lived here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in my early 20s, I didn't get it. I thought it was all about what is sinful and what is not sinful. Just don't sin. That was really, and I'm ashamed to admit that. That was obviously a deep spiritual immaturity in me. And I'm not saying that I hadn't been taught right. I'm saying I hadn't listened. I'm saying that those things had not been important enough to me to imbibe, to take in, and to apply in my life. But this was the problem that I struggled with for so many years, is the failure to understand that if I really want to finish, if my desire is to finish more than anything else, I have to shed the weight, and sometimes that weight might be something that I really like, and it's not inherently wrong. And that's a hard thing for us to accept. I want you to realize, though, that when we're talking about laying aside these things, what I want you to realize is that many times when we see a member in the church and we see their spiritual life beginning to degrade, their faith is weakening, their attendance becomes sporadic. We notice that they're not engaged. They're not a part of the work of a local church. They seem to be distant or detached. And we begin to notice some changes, some things going on in their life. Maybe it's their education and a lot of stress involved with that, or for a college student, or maybe it's a job and a pursuit of things that maybe they don't need to be chasing after. When we talk to them about those things, and that person gets offended and begins to give us the right act about what's sinful and what's not sinful, that's when we've got a pretty good idea that this person is in a very dangerous realm. And they're about to end up on the side of the racetrack, exhausted and destroyed. We've got to reach out to them, but even before that, remember, before we try to remove the speck from someone else's eye, how many of us are encumbered with so many things like this? And as I was mentioning earlier, the key to this is desire. The key to this is what we value. We're going to look at some things in this study this morning and this evening that are not inherently wrong, and there are going to be people here that say, well, I might have that, or whatever response it might be. And we're not looking at things that are inherently wrong. We're looking at things that when that becomes our desire, our craving, our value, that's when it begins to be an encumbrance. Jesus said in Matthew 6 and verse 21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Now, I know that Jesus said that we're to love God with all of our heart. And so if my treasure is somewhere else, and Jesus says that's where my heart will be, there's no way I love God with all my heart. Therefore, the problem, you see. And there are a lot of things that people treasure. We sometimes read this passage and we think about money, because for many people that's their treasure. But for other people, it might have to do with other things that are of a temporal nature. It's what you value above all other things. That's where your heart will be. So as we look at this study, I want you to realize we're talking about things that we crave and that we desire in an inordinate way, to where we're holding on to those things at our own spiritual degradation. What are some of these weights that weigh us down? What might they be? Well, I'm going to identify about 4. This morning we'll look at only one. It takes the most time. What I did when I was living here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I was constantly wondering why it was so hard to be a Christian. My life spiritually seemed to be like a yo-yo, just up and down. I'd feel strong at times, and then I'd feel so weak. I would fail so miserably, and I'd wonder, why does God make it so hard to be a Christian? And then, remember this morning I was talking about reading a passage that you've read a million times and realizing there's more substance there, and I began to get it. I was holding on to things that was making it hard to be a Christian. God wasn't making it hard. It didn't have to be hard to be a Christian. It was like a boat with barnacles on it, I was holding on to all these things, and I needed to surrender some of those things. And I began to identify what are some of those things that are holding me back spiritually that are not wrong in and of themselves. And one of the first things that I was struggling with was this craving and a desire for worldly success. And when I use the word worldly there, I know usually we use that word to mean something that is really sinful. I'm talking about worldly in the sense of this world, in the sense of temporal success. What we're really talking about here is being great in God's mind or in man's eyes. having the acclaim of men or the approval of God. And I'm not saying that you can't have both. Great men and women in the Bible did. And I know of many brethren that have accomplished both. And I know that there are people here that I'm certain have done that very thing. But what I know that in my life and what I've seen in the lives of others, I didn't have that balance. I didn't have, at that time, I didn't have that ability. I had too strong a desire. I had too much value on what other people counted to be success in this life. And I was listening to the motivational tapes and going to the seminars and doing everything I could to succeed. I'd been raised on a farm to work hard. I knew work ethic. I believed that I could outdo anyone else. And I was working as much as I could. But spiritually, I was always on the brink, falling away. I mentioned to you that I was a member at Westside in Irving and did not know Mark Gibson was a member here, but he was a close friend of mine there at that time, and he remembers that time in my life, and it was because of people like his parents and other people there that constantly admonished and encouraged and loved me and held on to me. Brother Jim Everett preaching there, late Brother Jim Everett, he was such an influence on me, convicting me constantly. But I couldn't understand. I'd go to these gospel meetings and be so built up, and then over a period of time, I would just feel like I was almost completely gone. And I was craving this so much that it was affecting my attendance, and I wasn't engaged in the work of that church. And I see that happen again and again and again, repeated in churches everywhere. And it's because we're not understanding what we're doing to ourselves. I remember when I was a member there, Brother Wayne Partain holding a meeting in Irving, and I remember Brother Partain speaking about one of the greatest men that he'd ever known. And I listened. What did that man do? And he said, this man, and I believe this was out in West Texas, maybe in the Odessa area where he preached, was a janitor at a local elementary school. He said that man, while he had not risen to the high acclaim of people of this world, had brought more people to Christ through Bible studies and handing out tracts and leaving tracts in places than any other person that he had known. That's greatness. Because here's what we've got to understand, that being great in man's estimation is not always going to be great in God's estimation. You know, Jesus made this point in Mark chapter 10 in verse 43. He said, it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. That's complete opposite of what this world thinks is great. He said, whoever desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. That's the key. And I want to tell you, young people, when you follow this, it doesn't mean that you won't be successful in the world's estimation. This is actually many times the path to that. But we have to be willing to count all things lost, as Paul did. I don't value those things. You know, it's kind of like those fancy towels that my wife hangs in the bathroom that I can't use. I'd give them away. I don't know what she paid for them. I'd give them away. You know, I don't value those things. And things that we don't value, we don't care what happens to them, right? And Paul said, I count all things lost. He was a prodigy among the Jews. He had his way made. He was a success in the making. And he said, I count that as rubbish, which that's a tame word for what it really meant in the Greek. And what we've got to understand is that's the way we've got to look at the estimation of men. When we want to be approved of and great in God's eyes, and we make ourselves a servant, many times that is the path to greatness, even in the eyes of men, but we need to not care about that. We need to seek to be great in God's eyes, because this can often be a weight. Remember, Jesus said in John 12, John writes about the rulers of the Jews, these men who had risen to the Sanhedrin court, they were rulers, they had made it, they had gotten there. He said, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. They didn't want to lose that success. Why? For they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. That's when this becomes a weight. And we've got to be honest with ourselves, and here's the thing. Sometimes we lie to ourselves enough that we believe it, and so we're going to have to be humble enough that when a brother or sister, an elder, a deacon, maybe the gospel preacher, takes us aside and says, I know you don't realize this, but you're carrying that water jug, and you're being exhausted, and you don't even realize it. I see you. You're in the death throes, and it's affecting your life and your marriage and your family. We've got to understand that these things do have that kind of impact on us. So in what way would this become a weight then? Well, because sometimes we might have a conflict between serving God and those things. And when we value them that much, when they've risen to the top place in our life, and we're still going to church, and we don't miss very much, and we make most nights of a gospel meeting, but we miss some, then whenever there is a real conflict, we wonder, why is it so hard to be a Christian? We get discouraged, we get resentful, and we're on the path to falling away in destruction. And I've been there. I know what that feels like. I think Stephen was pointing out, I didn't start preaching till I was 30. I worked in secular work for a number of years. And I was chasing that dream. I was chasing that goal. And yet wondering, why was I constantly so weak as a Christian? But we may have to give these things up. Jesus said in Matthew 10 verse 24, a disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple to be like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? Jesus wasn't counted a success. Not by the world. I mean, there was a time they wanted to make him a king, but it was flighty. It was short-lived. And it will be for us in many occasions. You know, the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 11, to the present hour we both hunger and thirst. He's talking about the apostles, the ambassadors of the King of Kings. He said, we're poorly clothed, beaten and homeless. We labor, working with our own hands. Being reviled, we bless. Being persecuted, we endure. Being defamed, we entreat. We've been made as the filth of the world, the offscouring of all things until now. Think about that word, offscouring. The junk you scrape off the bottom. He said that's the world's estimation of the apostles of Jesus. How many of us will rise to that level? And he said that's the value the world has for what we do. Then look in verse 16. Therefore I urge you, imitate me. It wasn't that Paul was a guy that couldn't have been successful. It's not like Paul said, well, I can't do anything else. I think I'll preach. It wasn't like Paul just had no other options. He had it made. And he left it behind. He gave it up and he said, imitate me. That doesn't mean that all of you have to quit your job if you have a well-paying job or you're successful. What he's saying to imitate is the mindset that says, this is what I want more than anything else, and I count all other things loss. It doesn't mean that we can't do something else. So we've got to understand that these things may come into conflict in our life. It did for Daniel. Daniel had to be willing to give up his level of success. He was about to be made second to the king, and he gladly was willing to surrender even that. Moses was willing to when he left Egypt because he counted the riches of Christ greater treasure. Paul was willing to. Here's the thing. It is not wrong in any way to be successful in the estimation of men. The danger is in the desire. The Bible actually tells us in Proverbs 27, beginning in verse 23, be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds, for riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. We need to be good stewards. We need to be hard workers. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. But do not value that. Do not let that be the treasure of your heart, but be responsible. Be a hard worker. And if you find that success, then that's great. But you see, the problem is that when we get close to that success, or we maybe accomplish a certain level of it, the world's estimation of success and the world's approval and acclaim, it's actually kind of intoxicating, because the more we get, the more we want. And that's why you find Christians that recognize that they've got something going on in their life. Maybe it's their sports or their education or their career, and they realize that it's getting in their way of being a Christian, and so they'll rationalize by saying, if I can just get to this point, if I can just make this team, if I can just get this next promotion, then I'm going to have more time and I'm going to do more at church. And it never works that way. What we've got to do is give ourselves wholly to God and let God give us the promotions and the success that we need. That's what he did with Joseph. That's what he did with Daniel. That's what he did with Paul, with all of those men of faith. And God will raise us up to the point that we need to be. And you know, when we think about this and this challenge of seeing what other people are doing and being pulled in by it, you know, there was a time, an age or so ago, when this was something we really needed to talk to the men of the congregation about. But I'll tell you, it is a challenge very much for our sisters in Christ as well, for our wives, for our daughters, because the world is telling them that if they pursue the life of a Christian, if their focus is on their role in domestic affairs, not that they can't do anything else, but that's their primary focus, the world is telling them that they'll never be fully accomplished in that way. Wives and mothers, I want to be absolutely clear. I don't think there is anything wrong in the world with a woman who works outside the home. So don't leave here after what I'm about to say and say, well, Brett doesn't think a woman ought to work outside the home, because that's simply not true. My wife has. And I expect that in time she will. Our family is getting to a point where she's going to have more liberty and ability to do that. So I don't think that that's wrong, but I do want to say that I believe that we have for many years been reaping the consequence of confused priorities in our families. And the world is confusing women by telling them that they will never be fully accomplished or fulfilled if they pursue simply the domestic affairs of this life. And that's a lie. That is a lie. That doesn't mean that a woman can't do something else. But what we need to understand, and what we need to get back to, and what we need to be teaching the ladies of this congregation, our daughters, because our daughters are being told by the world that they can do anything a man can do, and therefore they should do anything a man can do. The world's trying to completely destroy what God intended to be a healthy distinction between genders. And the fact that there are some that do this really well and others that do this really well, and He made us to do certain things really well. That doesn't mean that husbands can't help wives with their duties and that wives can't help husbands. But God made us. He made us to do what we're supposed to do. If a husband does not provide for his own, he's worse than an infidel. Never says that about a wife, does it? No, it doesn't. I want you to notice what God says, and this is what it's all about. Priorities. God says that the woman's priority is to be a manager of the domestic affairs. In Titus chapter 2 and in verse 5, he said that older women are to admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Not only there, but Paul also wrote in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 14, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. This is the priority that God has given the woman. And again, that doesn't mean, and I'm not saying that a woman cannot do something else. She can. Because I preach the gospel doesn't mean that I can't do something else. However, I think that we've all known or known of preachers that got so caught up in their personal interests or hobbies that it affected their work of preaching the gospel. We've got to make sure that we understand our priorities and that first things actually come first. And to see that this not only is the priority, but as I said, God made things this way. I know I'm being very politically incorrect right now. But I want you to notice in Genesis 2 and in verse 18, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. That is suited to fulfill his voids, what he needs. The very reason that God made the female gender was to be a helper to the man. There are a lot of other things she can do. But I want to tell you, contrary to what the world says, young ladies, contrary to what the world says, that is where you will find your greatest fulfillment and accomplishment. When you're serving God in doing primarily the very thing that He intends for you. Notice also in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 8 and 9, for man is not from woman, but woman from man, nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. That's pretty raw, isn't it? Can you imagine a local news station putting that up sometime, there would be a riot in the city. But it says what it says, right? And I want my daughter to understand that God will exalt and glorify her to the degree that she puts this first in her life. And yes, I want her to get an education. God gives young people a window of opportunity to pursue a lot of great things that is going to empower them in what they do for the Lord. Never to come first, but use it as a tool to empower us. And young ladies, do that. And you can do many things. My daughter wants to be a labor and delivery nurse. Great. But I've made clear to her that that is not her pursuit of life, but that her role as a wife and a mother is what her pursuit needs to be above all other things. And listen, the older women need to be teaching this. In Titus chapter 2, in verses 3 and 5, we just saw the older women that they admonish the young women to be homemakers. In too many places, I hear older members talking to the younger members more about their education and secular pursuits than they do about their faith. We need so much for older members to teach these things. And I know some of you ladies might be saying, well, Brett, I've tried and they don't want to hear it. Well, bless your heart, they don't want to hear a lot of things I say. That does not relieve us of our duty to tell people the truth, lovingly but boldly, to admonish them in what they need to hear. And yes, eventually, with an honest heart, they get it. I mean, don't we go through that with our kids? How many times do you go to bed at night and sit there with your spouse and say, they're just not getting it? I mean, I can't get through to them. And then there's that time where they just seem to walk in and say what you've been saying forever, and you're like, how did that happen? They got it. It's repetition. It's consistency. It's the fact that we don't compromise on what's true and that they see it in our life. They need to see, men, that we value what their mother does. How are we going to expect our daughters to have a goal of growing up to be a homemaker when we don't even show any value for that pursuit? If anything, we talk about women at work, and we never praise our wife in front of our kids. Let me tell you, she's not going to get anyone else's praise. She's not going to be acclaimed at school or on the news or anywhere else. If she's going to get any of what she deserves, it's going to have to be from us. And we teach our boys to praise their mother and to praise their wives by hearing us do it genuinely from the heart. And that's where a lot of this is failing. And our daughters, no wonder that they don't aspire to do that, because if they see a husband that doesn't value those things, why would they want to do that? We need to make sure that we're helping our wives and empowering them to be everything they can be. That's what this is all about. But wives, priority. The priority that God gives you is in this domestic role. And there are different times in your life when you can do more things outside the home and other times when you can do less. Keep that priority right. And never forget that priority is determined by the time and the effort devoted to a task. You know, sometimes we've heard this idea of quality time. You know, we need quality time. I'm going to spend quality time with my family. Why don't you try that at work? Why don't you tell your boss you're going to work 2 hours a day, but you're going to give him some quality time? See if he buys that. I think quality time is important, but quantity is also important. And so when we take that away from what we're doing, we're taking away from its priority. And we need to be honest with ourselves about that. But here's what I'm getting at. Not only are men facing this challenge, but women are being weighed down and torn apart at the seams, trying to be super mom and pursuing things that are not their responsibility in the first place. The world's telling our daughters they can do anything, and you know what? They're trying to do everything, and nobody can do everything and do it well. And they're finding themselves spiritually exhausted. And I'll tell you another reason, husbands, that our wives are feeling that exhaustion is because they're being, in a way, pushed out there to try to do everything because husbands are so addicted to their expensive toys. And we're trying to live on a level financially that we can't afford. And that's forcing a situation that shouldn't be there. We need, as husbands and fathers, to lead in teaching our family to be content with such things as honest work provides, to work with our hands what is good, that we may have to give to him who does not have need, and to lead our family in understanding that brings happiness and gratification, not more toys, so that our wives have to be completely spiritually exhausted by doing a lot of our responsibility. Again, I need to help my wife when she needs help, and I probably don't do it often enough, and she needs to help me when I need help. But at the same time, I understand that, even on a football team, there may be a time when a quarterback has to run out there and block for the running back, but that's not his forte, and that's not what he's really made for. And every now and then you'll see them get maybe a lineman back in the backfield and hand him the ball, but that's not really his best place. You don't use a screwdriver as a hammer. Sometimes, I bet you've done it. And sometimes it'll do. But we need to get back to teaching clearly, and I don't care what the world thinks about what we're saying, or even if it makes some people uncomfortable, this is what God's Word says. And we need to uplift and praise and give honor and glory to the godly women that are putting first things first, and encourage the young women, because the next generation is going to have, the health of the church is going to have everything to do with the health of the families in that church. And that comes back down to the foundation of these godly women. So, lay aside every weight. Are we pursuing these careers at the cost of God? James 4 and verse 14 says, "You do not know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away." We can't let ourselves do that. We don't know how much time we have. Is your job causing you to habitually miss the assemblies? I think sometimes when we announce that Brother so-and-so or Sister so-and-so is working tonight, that brethren think, oh, well, that's, like a hall pass. It's okay for me to miss for work. I understand there are extenuating circumstances, but habitually, that becomes forsaking. It becomes forsaking. Husbands that habitually are not home, that's forsaking. And we need to understand it for what it is. And I know sometimes people will kind of rationalize and say, yeah, my ox was in the ditch this week. Sometimes that happens. That's from Luke 14 and verse 5. Jesus said, which of you having a donkey or an ox that's fallen into a pit will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? He says sometimes there are extenuating circumstances. They were being hypocritical about this, by the way. But what it shows us is that there are times when we have an emergency. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these careers where it's a habitual thing. And in talking about having an ox in the ditch, I grew up on a farm. We raised cattle. My dad, ever so often, would go out and buy a new bull. And sometimes we'd have one that he just got out all the time. He'd tear down fences. We'd have to go get him back in. My dad called that a rogie bull. And you know what we did when we had a bull that kept getting out? We ate him. And we got a different bull. And if your ox is habitually falling into the ditch, you need to get another ox. There's something wrong with an ox that habitually falls in a ditch. He's blind? I don't know. Sometimes, as I said, we rationalize by not really being honest with ourselves. The fact is, you're being weighed down. No one can serve two masters. We've got to be honest with what we're doing here. And the thing that deceives us, and why this is the reason Satan's so good at what he does, because we believe that there's going to be a time in the future when we'll be able to fully devote our lives to the Lord. Oh, honey, I'm so close to retirement. I worked with guys over here at Lockheed, General Dynamics at that time in Fort Worth, and I can't tell you how many guys I saw retire from there. They bought their motorhome. They told me where they were going to go on vacation, and within a few months, heart attack, cancer, they never enjoyed it. And they worked and they worked and they worked to finally enjoy being with their family or with their wife. And they would forego those things. We need to, as we're going to see Wednesday night, live each day as if it were our last. We need to be a faithful steward today. God's not asking for tomorrow. He wants today. I think it was W.R. Jones in a meeting over here in Haltom City many years ago. He said, yesterday is a canceled check. Tomorrow's a promissory note. Today's ready cash. That's what the Lord wants. Put that first in your life, in everything that you're doing, and lay aside every weight and run with endurance. Do you really want to finish? Then you need to understand that there are things that are not inherently wrong that are weighing you down. We're going to look at 3 more this evening. They're not necessarily sinful, but they're keeping us from finishing. And if your desire is to finish, you'll lay anything aside, anything that it takes. The key is the desire and the value that you really have. If you're here this morning and you've never obeyed the gospel of Christ, I want to tell you that's the most important thing that you can ever accomplish in life, is to be redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ and to be back in fellowship with your Creator so that you can spend eternity with Him. He created you to be in fellowship with Him. That's your purpose. And you will never find fulfillment or happiness in pursuing anything else until that comes first. Do you need to obey the gospel? Come believing in Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God. Repent of your sins. Confess your faith in Him and be baptized in water for the remission of sins. All things are ready. We're pleading with you to come while we now stand and sing the invitation song.